Welcome to this version of the Memory Team weekly meeting. It is January 11th. There are a couple not verbalized items, and we'll jump right into this week's agenda. So we have the planning issue, and I've asked for some breakdown. So we have a lot of ideas, and we're still doing some research. I know there's some implementation issues, but let's continue to break down issues for the 2 gig footprint goal along the lines of the 3 themes that we're talking about. So take a look at the issue, and I've added a couple of issues that were requested by other folks on the planning issue. So take a look, and Camille, you have a comment there.
Yeah, so I still have to look at that, but I think one of the aspects that it's pretty, I guess, important is like to rework our documentation, because it's like very specific to very specific case. And like at least we had some discussion in the past that like the documentation and like reflecting the current state could be like the very first good step to actually have a place wherever we figure out some additional tuning to have a very easy place to add these additions in the future. So this is my comment. Feel free to disagree.
No, it makes sense. I remember us talking about it at one point in time. I'm just trying to recall, and I was looking real quickly. I thought we had an issue for that. I will make sure that we do.
I think we have the issue. The question is like it kind of sleep somewhere. So I guess from my perspective, this would be like the most important item as the outcome of the 13.9, with like everything else adding and extending this documentation once we have it.
Oh yeah. There was the one I'm thinking of was actually closed. I think that was specific to something else. So yeah, I'll take a look and make sure that we have something. All right, in the Puma.
Yeah, so about Puma, I grouped up all the Puma stuff, not only 5.1, but also Nakayoshi and Puma single. So 5.1 is approved by everyone, but I'm just waiting for it to be merged. It was postponed because of security fix and some concerns about not everyone was available on the time. So now it should not be a blocker anymore. So I just pinged everyone who I could, and I hope it will be merged today or tomorrow. Otherwise, I will ping again and try to merge it. And to be honest, next I want to concentrate fully on Puma single, because I see like it's probably one of the most visible improvements. And thanks, Camille, for reading notes, but I didn't look at them yet. So it will probably be my main priority next week or so. If you have any concerns, please tell. So, but I want to concentrate on Puma single mostly.
Yes, I mean, like you have mentioned Nakayashi fork. Is it something like that is basically
no?
Or is
it wouldn't require anything from me, like much effort. I will just add them it to config and just move these 3 MRs through review. So it's just a side work. So I will just do it in parallel. So I will just open 3 Nakayashi forks MRs and will track them. And in parallel, I will actually work on Puma single, which has some issues, as we've seen with metrics.
Fabian, what do you think about like Puma single? It's basically like 2 gig target really item that I think it was, we are saying something like 200 megabytes, I guess, Alexei, something
yeah. I need to check, but it was quite a huge improvement.
So what is the specific question?
What do you think about like us focusing on Puma single?
Oh, I think it's good. I mean, in my mind, the way, like, correct me if this is wrong, my understanding was that we would only actually use Puma single if we detect there is a very small amount of RAM available. So for a some switch that says, okay, you are in a memory constrained environment, we are going to default to Puma single. That is actually going to save you memory. That is how I understood it. Maybe speaking of documentation, we don't even need to do this, right? We could just document that if you are in a memory constrained environment, you can actually switch this into single mode, and that will save you X amount of memory. So
yeah, I think it would be easier to start without automatic detection because it's like another layer and another issue to do that correctly.
If that's a more minimal iteration, I think that's a good first step.
Yeah, we could start with the reference architecture documents, because that's where we give the recommendations for cluster size, and we have one now for as few as 500 users, I think. That sounds like something that could be served from the Puma single, maybe.
I guess it would be like smaller installation that will maybe introduced, right?
I think the way I see
we want
this,
an even smaller one, like a kind of embedded devices
maybe.
target or something.
Yeah. No, and I think this is maybe the maybe I misunderstood you, Camille, but my understanding of this documentation is to also say, if you run under like a really small instance, whatever that means, we can define that, or have very small user base. These are a specific list of tweaks and configuration options that will allow you to reduce GitLab's memory footprint and run more performant, right? And I think then maybe that is even a reference architecture, right? Where you can say, 15 users or something like that, right? Or really memory constrained environments, and then we can document it there.
Yes, I mean, my perception was like that we would like introduce this ability to use Puma single, but we would at least for now document that, but there would be no automation, because automation would mean like breaking trends of the behavior. So maybe like this automation could be part of the 13.0, where like we do this detection really kind of item to shrink. But for now, I would kind of assume that we know that this is like, if you run on these, let's say 3 gigs and less, just follow these steps to reduce the memory usage. Of maybe configure, or maybe like include pre-configured omnibus template. I have no idea. Maybe this would be the way how you would approach that. But I'm kind of assuming that like it would be, we would have some entry in the documentation for Puma single, and like the benefit of using that with the drawbacks of using that Puma single.
Yeah, and I still recall maybe in our last meeting or the meeting before, time has no meaning anymore in lockdown. I think you, Camille, said you also think of the work that we do in like 2 different ways. We have specific things that have very high impact for our small memory footprint, like Puma single, but it actually has no impact at all for most of our users or .com, right? Because we won't use it there, but it is still valuable for this specific initiative. And then there are other things that actually have more global impact. I think at the moment we should
like GC tuning that we are also
like GC tuning, exactly. And I think we still do want to see how far we can move towards the 2 GB in this specific environment. But there are also all of these other efforts, which I think are generally really important, right? And they would be important even if they have nothing to do with our 2 GB memory footprint, right? And I think that's actually a longer term theme, right? Or GitLab exporter, where Matthias, I think, did a lengthy excavation of this, right? And I think there are quite some implications for the general application, right? And that's also important.
Okay, then that's it. I will work on Puma single starting today, I think, even.
Alexi, question on that. So I think most of the information is listed under the Puma upgrade to version 5.1. So sorry, I got Windows annoying. I'll drag the issue over.
We have a separate issue for Puma single. It's just a separate issue for 5.1.
Is this the best place to track all the things like the Nakayoshi fork?
No, Nakayoshi fork is a separate issue as well.
Okay.
So I think it's under this epic reduce memory footprint.
Okay. I will follow along. All right. GC tuning's up next.
Yeah, so that was the problem with that we didn't really get any good stable baseline from which to compare the results. So we had a sync last week and we decided there's 3 things we can do that might improve that. So one thing was the way we obtain these metrics, which we had so far emitted through in-app samplers that run at a random interval, and they have been collected from a Prometheus sampler, Prometheus scraper that also runs at a random interval. So we said, maybe we can just add an application endpoint that for each worker that you look at, or if it's just one Puma single, you can just get them directly from the process. So that's something I put in MR. So Camille, I was wondering with this MR, just to speed this up a bit, I'm wondering like if all this extra stuff with like having this for Sidekick as well, maybe we can just leave that out for now and just use the main metrics endpoint and then add a worker PID to that result and then ship that first, because that would already be an improvement, I think. Because I think all this stuff with having the exporters that run in the app support this as well, it's getting tricky.
Yes, I need to look at that MR because I know that you marked that as a draft, but I guess we can figure out something smaller that resolves like your particular case. And maybe we would just fix that with like exclamation mark, sorry, with the star asterisk, that it's only for the Puma single in the development.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good first step. And for Sidekick, I think it might work to use Unix sockets for this, but maybe we can just spin that out in a separate issue even. Because we're only looking at Puma right now anyway.
I'm not sure exactly. I need to look at the MR because like I wrote a comment, I know that you like reassigned to me, but I think we can figure out something simple to merge. Because then like Puma single for you is gonna basically be removing one initializer.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Because then you could just curl.
Yeah.
Because then you could just curl like the single endpoint that we would add right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a bit like, it's always a bit tricky when you do it. For it to be comparable, I think we said we want to use the omnibus VM, and then it's always a bit like fiddly to do that, but it's definitely possible. It's just you have to go in and then mutate the source code inside the VM, but it's definitely possible.
Matthias, how about like you introduce MR that allows us to run Puma single if there is like environment variable configured to true? So like allow us to disable this initializer.
You mean just override that behavior for now?
I mean, like there is this initializer with the validate Puma.
Yeah, maybe, but it's not just this. Like it's just a bunch of things will break if you remove. There's a reason we have the initializer, right?
Yes, I mean it's fine, but like if you would, I mean deliberately.
Yeah, just as an experimental thing, you mean?
As an experimental thing, you could have that in a package.
Yeah.
In a consistent form, but like also easy for you to start.
Yeah, maybe if we don't document it, then we're always safe, because we can always say stuff that's not documented, shouldn't be used. It's kind of more for like only use if you know what you're doing kind of situation. Yeah, I guess we could do that.
Because like I guess it would be something for you like to not fiddle with the omnibus. You will just use the latest omnibus.
Yeah, because that is definitely it's not a massive impediment, but it's just like the workflow is really not great. Yeah, it's a good point. I can try to see what maintainers think about, but I think it's a fair point.
To me, I
exactly.
I'm also a maintainer.
Yeah, I'm just gonna take a note. I think it's a good idea.
I can also just approve stuff, right? Not that it has any meaning or impact,
Okay, let's think about that. I guess Nicola gonna be fine with approving stuff. I'm just gonna click it merge.
Yeah, cool. All right.
Why not?
Problem solved. Nicola, we talk later, okay?
All right, cool. So I'll just make sure to get that MR in shape.
Let's stop recording.
Sign back to you.
I'll edit this section of the recording out.
Yeah, just got it.
No, we're just not gonna make any harm to the product. It's gonna be undocumented feature.
Under the hood.
Under the hood for like initial experimentation of also for the Alexi. I guess it's gonna be useful for him as well.
Okay. Are we on the GitLab exporter now?
Yes, I have a couple of remarks, but they're waiting for feedback. So not much to do here at the moment until I merge them. I don't want to open another one.
Is this your comment here about talking about this in a separate session?
It's Matthias.
This is my comment, sorry. I forgot to put my name in front of it. I actually, Ben suggested catching up, and I agree that at this point there are so many different opinions and conflicting opinions on where to take this thing. It's really important that we at least agree on what should happen with GitLab Exporter, and not even on this we have consensus. I wonder if we, I think maybe it would make sense for Camille, Ben, and myself to catch up first, and then take it back to the team, because I definitely think at this point that maybe we're a bit over eager with saying we're going to remove this thing entirely. Ben would still love to see it go entirely, but there's so much complexity there, like some of it because we're not even running this thing on .com. So we're already starting to make all these changes, but we don't know how we will even test that on GitLab Says, because it's not running in its current version on GitLab Says. So so there will be a time where we'll have to face the decision as well. Do we want to update it to the latest version, or like, yeah, never update it again, or move to its potential replacement or whatever? And it's getting very complicated. So I think it would be good to untangle some of these, kind of branches that came out of it, and then kind of go from there before we put more work into it and then find that maybe that wasn't a good idea. Yeah.
What's the next step on that one? What is the next step?
Like I just said, I think we need to find common ground here to even decide what the next steps are. And I think it would be good to do that synchronously, because there's a lot of back and forth and issues. And there is some pressure from other teams already, like Bob is looking to introduce a new metric to GitLab Exporter, and we can't tell folks, hey, you can't add anything to this without giving them a good alternative, and we don't have a good alternative right now. So that blocks other teams. So that's not good. So yeah, I think we need to think about, do we want to get rid of it? If so, like, how are we going to do this? Or if not, we need to find common ground for what do we do with these metrics that need to move out of it. Because even this, we haven't really found a good solution for. Like the the Sidekick sampler stuff, for instance, I closed that MR because there was a bunch of scalability problems with that approach. Yeah. Right. So one thing.
There's a couple questions on that still. So are we, what's our goal on this one, right? I think the original goal was we dropped GitLab Exporter because we are reducing memory. And then from what I recall, we couldn't because it was super complicated, but there are things that we can drop to reduce some memory there, right? This one kind of feels like the dynamic image exporter. It seems like there's some quick wins that we can get out of it, even though they might be small, by dropping some metrics. And that the bigger picture, long-term dropping this should belong to the team that owns it, and it's not ours. We can give some guidance on what we've discovered, but it belongs to another product team on the future of that.
Okay, right. There's a couple things to follow up on. So the first thing is, I actually see it the other way around. Our original goal was to reduce memory, not to drop GitLab Exporter. And I think this is where I just said, I think maybe we derailed the overall goal there a little bit. So maybe we just want to shrink it. And there's different ways to go about this as well that we need to figure out. And some of it is maybe we just keep chipping away at moving things out of it and then leave it as is. One thing we're looking into is to run it on a more lightweight rack server. That's something I have MRs open for this, but I don't really have like super clear evidence from my local testing that this actually significantly reduced memory. But it's also difficult to compare to something that runs, in production for a couple of days. And it's actually not that easy to measure, which is a good point that Alexei pointed out, because GitLab Exporter does not monitor itself. It just monitors other components. So we don't actually have memory metrics for it in production. So there's some open questions there. And another point you mentioned was the ownership. We had a meeting last week with Monitor. And Fabian, correct me if I'm wrong, but the overall takeaway for me was they're not going to work on this in the mid to maybe even long term, because they don't have capacity. So it's, and also it's kind of a fair point because it doesn't squarely fall into Monitor section, because it's also an infrastructure component, right? We use it to monitor our Sidekick fleet, right? We do that just to monitor like the health of our SaaS offerings. So it's not really just squarely like for GitLab self-monitoring as a feature. We also just use it generally for observability. So it's difficult to find an owner.
Can I, I'll just add my 2 cents to this, right? The way I understand this is we started looking at this because we were interested in reducing the overall memory footprint. That is also our, I think as a team, that was sort of our primary goal here. Maybe, dropping it is not the right strategy. Maybe shrinking it or reducing some things is, I don't know, right? But the goal for us, I think, was to reduce the memory footprint. The way I see this is in the process, of touching this, we encountered a gigantic hairball of complexity, and finding a component that is not well maintained, has all sorts of issues, right? You talked about many of them. And I think the decision here is, or what we need to establish is, what can we as a team be reasonably expected to do, not only selfishly, but also for sort of global optimization, and say like, what can we actually do here, right? And is that helpful for GitLab as an overall product? And what can we not do? Because maybe, what actually should be done, which is, to really work on it, right? Or provide an alternative or whatnot, is actually a really big endeavor, right? That requires a lot of focus, and maybe that's really not where we should spend our time going forward, given the other responsibilities that we have. But I think what we definitely should do is write down what we found, say like, look, this is how we encountered it, right? We talked to those people, this is the current situation, and then try to find, we talked to the product team in Monitor, they said, not our priority, right? See if there's a better home for it. But I'm personally would be hesitant, to say this is what we're going to take on for the next 3 months, and we're going to completely rewrite GitLab Exporter, unless we really have very good reason to do so for sort of global reasons, right? But I think I would be a little bit hesitant, essentially just because we did the poking, right, and we found something does not necessarily that we need to clean it up completely as well, right? I think there are some things we can do. If we're transparent, I think that's important, but I don't think we need to like sort it out completely either, right? Because that means that other things will not be able to happen. That's sort of my 2 cents.
And I think, thanks for the summary, agreed. And I think a lot of that's covered in the epic that I have listed here in the doc. So maybe the effort is we identify the sub-issues in that epic on what we will own. And then much like we did with the image resizer, we find an owner to hand off eventually. And maybe there is no owner and it's labeled as not owned. And I can't remember the exact labeling on that one, but we identify issues in that epic that we are going to do and explicitly mark the ones that we are not going to do.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And we have done this, right? I mean, we already had our sync with Monitor. If they don't own it, who will? Is my question, right? Because I mean, maybe we just say it belongs to infrastructure. Maybe that would actually be a better owner. I actually see a lot of commits from 4 years ago or so. I just had a chat, not a chat, but like an online exchange with is it Amar? I forgot the name. He's on the infrastructure team. So there's definitely multiple teams that contribute to the system. But that said, the things that we thought would be most impactful, we already own, we already work on. Like I said, that's the migration to a different app server. So that's almost done anyway. With the little footnote that we will only really be able to test this for self-managed, which also adds a bit more risk, right? Because it means like it's just another thing we change that will not apply to .com. But yeah, that, you know.
But I think it would be, it wouldn't be unfair to find an exit point in this release, right? And say essentially we did what we thought was good. You know, this is the situation. I don't really think Monitor said this is not our issue at all. I think they said more like, we have so many other things that are more important. And I am in no position to judge that, right? They know much better what they have to work on than I do. And I think infrastructure or whoever is the customer, they may also disagree on that, but then I think they need to talk to that team a little bit more. I personally, you know, I would not think that the memory team is the best team to own this, just superficially. It feels not like the right thing. It feels like, so I would.
No, definitely, I agree. Like,
yeah.
I didn't mean to imply
really...
we should. Yeah, that I agree.
Perhaps simply changing the title of the epic would help too, because right now it says drop GitLab exporter. It seems like there's still some discussion about what is the best path forward with GitLab exporter. So,
I mean, I can spend some time going through the epic. It's just I broke out like 5 or 6 issues from that, and they all talk about how to make progress towards removing it. So I will have to go through all the issues again. But
I think actually something actionable here would be rename the epic, update the description with the latest state of things, and just at the top of it say, this is, you know, this is where we are at as of today, right? And then we can leave it open and
yeah, that's a fair point.
Just ping the relevant people.
I still think it would make sense for Ben, Camilla, and myself to catch up. Otherwise, I bet we will have the same discussion again in 3 months, because this has been coming up over and over again ever since I've been at GitLab. So I think we just need to find some common ground, and then I'm happy to update the epic with what we agree on should actually be the next steps.
All right. Yeah. Cool. Thank you. On to GraphQL.
Oh, this is actually So this is actually the part where we are trying to provide the mechanism for splitting our application in some functional parts. So I prepared the POC that is like proposing the mechanism to use the Rails engines. And we had a really nice discussion last week about it. We looked at it, and yeah, like proposing the new architecture will be a little bit complex thing to push. And we decided that I will concentrate this week to move the specs to the engine itself, which will allow us to check if everything works as expected, and it will like give us insight that what is the complexity of the real solution, like how much effort it's needed to move some component to the engine itself, because we will not just stop with the GraphQL. Idea is to move different functional parts to those engines. So we need to know like if this solution is simple enough. And I would also like to provide some metrics, so we are sure like how much memory we have saved by moving the GraphQL to the separate engine, and if it's not loaded in Sidekick, like how much faster the application boots, and I don't know how much memory do we save. I'm not sure how to achieve this, because like measuring this is a little bit complex. But I think that we will need all those informations, because Camille created the blueprint, so we can like push this conversation over to like wider audience. So I guess that all those infos will be helpful if we like decide to move in this direction. I think that this solution also can help like speeding up the booting time of application, which is another issues that we have for 13.9, I think. And I don't know, Camille, if you have anything else, please add up.
I am just curious about like what it takes to have it running, as you mentioned. Second, what is the complexity behind that? And third, like what is the benefit? Because like if we have these 3 items in place, this is actually like the very good items to really like to push to others to give their opinion. And we also know if this is really worth the effort in the end from us, because if we would follow that, it's gonna be pretty significant item to push. And I'm just want to understand that this is actually really worth for us to push.
I agree.
Like thinking about ROI of the investment. Like, I mean, in long term, I think it's definitely helpful if we would figure out a way to make our code base more component context based. I'm just worried that like, can we just do it alone? It's pretty severe task to do it. But if it gives like very big benefits and like we have that proven by GraphQL, it could be like very tempting item to propose the shift in how we create application components of the application in long term.
What worries me is that GraphQL is really nice example because it's really easy to extract it and it's very clear when it's used and where it's not. But like splitting our application further is going to be more challenging than that because we have a really complex both ways dependencies. So I'm just worried that we will prove that for GraphQL it will work, but I'm not sure how we will like continue splitting the application further.
I agree. This is why like we need to have a success story why it is needed, because then like we could actually have more teams to think about like this problem as well, not only us. So at least from my perspective, like if we can deliver GraphQL as a success story of the split and give like the hint that this brings this much of the benefit, this can be like a very good data point to change how we actually develop GitLab, because it's actually would show like how complex is to extend that first. I mean, how benefits are from the testing perspective. I mean, running our specs, and also impact on the velocity of our development and quality. But third is like the memory usage and like the effort needed like to retain that usage on the lower boundaries. So there is like a lot of uncertainty, but I'm not really worried about like the next step. I'm worried about like figuring out if the GraphQL is like really the simplest item to present like the benefits of that model. Because if it is and it's most impactful, I think it could be like very beneficial for GitHub in the general. Does anyone have any opinion, or maybe I'm just like completely off?
I agree.
I think the only point I have, which is non-technical, is maybe this is a good thing to time box, right? And say like, you're going to investigate it, you're going to write it down, because I don't know. It sounds like there's a lot of open-endedness to it, and so that may also limit our exposure to not being so clear about it, right? If it can't be figured out in a couple of weeks, then maybe it is already too complicated to actually make a good inference. But I'm not sure about that. That's just a thought.
I think it should be, because we need just to move the specs and find a way how to measure it. So I guess this is achievable in like a week or two.
And I was going to say, I agree with Camille's summary. It was a very good summary of, making sure we have that example out there. It's well documented, how to measure before, how to measure the impact of after, so that we can enable other teams to do something similar and set an architectural pattern. So agreed, and it fits with the goal of our section being the enablement section. So nice summary, Camille. Thank you. And while we were talking, I brought one of the issues into 13.9 that was related to that one. So, which is a good segue. So for specific issue updates, I called out a couple here. So there was the one, reduce the memory impact of GitLab monitoring. There was a question to Fabian for answering some questions outlined in the description. So that's something we should just move to 13.9 since this milestone is going to end at the end of the week.
But we do have a little update, but I failed to update the issue that we spoke to Sarah, who owns this, and I think the answer is surprisingly it's complicated, right? So they don't know really. So many parts of the application use this monitoring stack. Right, and so they would be uncomfortable just saying, hey, if you use less than that, we're going to turn it off. And I think they have no good understanding of who is actually using it and for what either. So that's, I think, a part of the complexity here. That doesn't mean we can't actually maybe try it ourselves, just turn it off and see, like what exactly that, the impact is, but that's kind of the only information I have. And Matthias, you asked that question actually. Is that a fair summary? Yeah. So it's not very surprising, right? It's like it.
Yeah, I mean there was one. I don't think it directly relates to what you said, but one thing I misunderstood when we talked about this was that that it was pointed out that it's several features across the whole GitLab product suite that depend on this. But she was actually referring back to a comment I had made in the issue because we export metrics for like a bunch of different components like Git and CI runners.
I see.
Most of which we have figured out though by now, whether they're used or not. But still, yeah, it's like, I mean, you said it earlier, it's a bit of a big hairball, the whole thing.
Okay, so it sounds like there's still some experimentation that could take place. It doesn't sound like it's going to happen this week, so I will move this to 13.9, and probably the same for the next one. The Sidekick cluster should preload before forking. We'll kick that one down the road again. There's nobody that has been assigned to it, so move those down. And then Camille, you have the next one.
Yes, I have this very small addition to the Ruby VM about like being very accurate about memory allocation, and there is like associated issue to that. But I'm actually right now trying to understand if the upstream is interested in the feature. If it's interested, it would give me very good incentive to finish that, and second, merge that internally, and maybe even patch like the Ruby VM for internal usage. I mean, I'm not sure if you are following the goal of that, but I want to be able to accurately categorize, not really categorize, like measure amount of the memory allocated in total by a given request and worker. And now, since there is like the scalability effort of assigning for each controller, API, and side key worker feature category, this could give like the maybe good estimation and like the long-term trend, how much given category is generating memory pressure per unit of the execution on average. And like I was thinking that this may be the way for us to see how the runtime memory of the application do change over time, and like what aspects of the application, requests, or maybe workers allocate most of the memory in a given unit of time, which could be a second, and something that could be useful for us to optimize based on amount of the these occurrences. So like finding a way to figure out parts of the application that are the biggest sink of the memory allocation when running, that are frequently executed, that we could optimize. We today don't have any way to like measure that. We can only grab a metric sampling the whole process, but we don't have any granularity and an ability to assign that for the given category. There was some idea about the trace object allocations, but it's expensive. This approach is basically free to basically measure and like to count. So I'm not trying to understand like how interested is the upstream on getting something like that.
You mean the USDT probes I mentioned today?
Sorry, can you say again?
You mean expensive with regards to what is that a reference to the USDT probes thing I mentioned in Slack this morning? Because Ruby, the Ruby VM, I think it does define a bunch of trace points you can hook into already. So I wonder if it would make sense to spend some time with that as well, because it doesn't rely on a custom fork or something. Ruby, it just means it needs to be compiled with those switches enabled. So I think this is maybe like, something we should look into.
I checked that the data that I'm counting, they are not exposed in easy way. Okay. In a given context that I want. I want to like we concurrently run many requests. Currently, like you get a global counters, maybe trace allocations, but it's still like the global information that you receive. I'm just interested in the given context of the execution, which could be request or Sidekick job, how much memory the given thread did allocate. And I'm assuming that this very accurately translates to how much the pressure on the memory allocator it produces. It could be JMalloc or GC. So what you're mentioning is something different, but it doesn't answer the question that I have. Basically, I want to know that like if I run 2 requests concurrently at the same time, I know exactly how much memory the given request had to allocate during its execution. I mean, it's about how many GC slots it consumed during that execution. It could be like every object application. It could be, I'm assuming that incremental is fine, and how much like actual malloced memory was allocated as well. So today you don't have like any way to get this data in the kind of like shared environment. We had this information in the unicorn world, but unicorn would execute only a single request at the given time in a given process. So you could just get GC start before and after. It would still not give you a very accurate malloc increase bytes information, because it's a counter that is being, sorry, it's a gauge that is being incremented or decremented, but it would give you some hint. But this is actually like a counter that is really incremented over time and gives you like very accurate information about how much the given process, the given context of the execution that allocate during this period of time. It's very simple. It's basically adding props in 3 different places to measure that, where there is like the object allocation. Object allocation always happen on a thread that is being executed within the given context of the execution. So I tested that like manually on some test examples, and like it actually gave me the information that I was expecting to receive.
Okay, we are running up on time, so I think if anybody has any questions, follow up with Camille Async on that one. And Nicola closed out the query cache for load balancing. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then Matthias.
Yeah, I squeezed that in because that had been in the backlog. I just added it to the current milestone because it looks like we might be closing it out this milestone because we just Workhorse to a new version that includes our kind of PNG chunk correcting custom reader. So we're going to take that for a spin this week and see if that has any positive impact on the error rate.
Okay.
And then that's probably the last thing we're going to be working on, an image scaling.
No, I mean, the last point here is I consider the handover done. We had scheduled a sync meeting that was not necessary because of Matthias' excellent documentation. But I've decided to leave the issue open for a little while, just in case if team members from the other team read the docs and have some questions, but we should be able to close this out essentially at will. I just left it open as a courtesy, essentially. And we could also close it and say, if you have any questions, reopen it. I mean, it doesn't really matter to me.
All right. Looks like that's it for the agenda topics. Anything we missed? Any other subjects folks want to bring up? All right, I'll take that as a no. Happy Monday, everyone, and welcome back, Alexi.
Yeah.
Don't forget.
Thank you.
Friday,
Yeah, happy Monday,
Friends and
everyone.
Family Day.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye.
Have a good evening.